It is time for StreetWise with former chief of the New York City Sheriff's Department, former chief of the Seagate Police Department, retired New York City detective, Time Warner Public Access Media Award, Joe Franklin Super Excellence in Broadcasting Memory Lane Award, New York Veteran Police Association StreetWise Productions, host of StreetWise, Mr. Lou Telano.
Good evening and welcome back to StreetWise. My guest this evening is a clinical forensic psychologist. He's been a professor in mental health over 20 years. He's got a podcast, too. We'll talk about that in a moment. That's interesting, and, the timing is good. I say timing is good. For what's going on around the country, we need someone like my guest. It's my pleasure. I have to say this. I know him quite a while now, and I guess I could call him, and I hate to say old friend, but seems to be an old, young friend now. My pleasure to introduce back to StreetWise, a different location, same StreetWise, Professor Dr. John Huber. John, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Lou. Glad to be here.
Obviously, we touch on it. I like to, talk about the several mass shootings going throughout the country. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're speaking from your great educational background, but I see a common denominator in these the El Paso, Ohio, and Chicago shootings. I find a common denominator. The majority of them come from, I guess you could say, dysfunctional background or no father figure, maybe a loner or introvert. Am I on the right track?
Definitely. In fact, I think the most recent shootings we can look at and see that these mass shooters are almost all of them come from an absentee parent, a father in particular. Yeah. Doesn't mean dad's not physically there, but he's not involved in the kid's upbringing. And they oftentimes have a very strong, domineering mother that doesn't necessarily let them make their own choices and doesn't teach them to make their own choices, basically, almost pushes them into doing things. And they don't learn how to cope. They internalize all this anger, and bam, when they finally snap, it's big. It's not a little small thing. So that's a very common theme along them. We also know, like you said, 79% since 2000 of these mass shooters have been single. Of the 79%, 22% were recently divorced or separated. So they can maintain some sort of relationship, but they tend to, if they do, they break up before they go and do this type of stuff. So big red flag when you have that absentee parent and then being single. Those are some major things to look at right there.
Wow. I see a connection, a little different than the Chicago. We have a high rate, which I think we spoke about it before, high rate of shootings. Chicago, Baltimore, now New York seems to be getting up there. Pretty much the same. Also, again, from experience, no father figure in the home.
Absolutely. That's what we see. And, we saw the shootings 2 weekends ago, and that weekend we had 59 shootings in Chicago. Yeah. And that didn't even get local news coverage. Then this week, I think there was 40 or so this weekend. So This is an every weekend event in Chicago, and it's a sad thing, but you will see that is a common denominator, that absentee parent.
Right. And, in the case of New York, we obviously, a lot of these states have strict gun laws, and I want to get a little political, if I may.
It's your show.
Okay, but I don't want to draw you in from you, for what you do best. Actually, do a lot of things pretty well. New York has one of the strictest gun laws. So doing anything with gun control, to me, is a farce. We need, not to be, corny to a degree, we need people control, I think. What happened in New York is that the new, I can't say new, Mayor de Blasio restricted the police from doing this stop and frisk and question. And the criminals, the street thugs, the street element are aware of it. So now they're not afraid to walk around with guns here. And so that's one of the things that I see. So you need the law to play a role in this, like they used to in my time. So that's been increasing the shootings in New York recently. So we're gonna hopefully not pass Chicago or Baltimore, these other states, So I don't know your thoughts on that to get a little legal
Well,
in the matter.
yeah, my thoughts on that are passing another law is not going to change the shootings.
Correct.
In fact, it may actually increase the frequency by not allowing legally carried weapons by legal, upstanding citizens from carrying, being able to defend themselves. We already have a law that basically should make all of this illegal. And
Yes.
you're not allowed to kill somebody. It's called murder,
Yes.
homicide.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what means you use. And if laws would stop criminals from killing people, we've already got that, and that should be something to think about. And then they're going after these AR-15s. Well, the last year we have full data that we fully analyzed is 2017,
Right.
and that year we actually had more people killed by hammers and baseball bats than we did by long rifles. Even though we had 47,000 gun deaths that year, we only had 400 or so that were done with long rifles, not just AR-15s, which is a small percentage, but long rifles like deer rifles and like that. So it's really amazing. They're picking this one thing out because it looks scary, as opposed to the other guns. Everybody say, oh, well, those don't look scary. Why are we banning those? So it's a real easy emotional target to go after. And, if we look at the mass shootings alone, they talk about how it's getting worse and worse. Well, for the last 12 or 15 years, we've maintained somewhere between 20 and 30 mass shootings as defined by the FBI, not the media, but the FBI actual definition they've been using since the 60s or so. And what we see is right now, that last shooting in Dayton, that was number 19 for this year. So we still are behind the top of having 30. And it's kind of ridiculous how they just pinpoint all this stuff and tell people what to believe and what to think. And we as citizens need to start paying attention, doing our own homework and finding out what's really going on.
Well, you mentioned we have to enforce the laws, but it's great for political reasons, which
Yes.
That's one of the reasons why it's became our conversation. But we're not talking about the guy that went on a rampage in California with a knife killing people. So we're going to do knife control, baseball bat control.
Well, I just saw a statement this morning from the mayor of London who, guns are banned there and they've been confiscated by the citizens. Well, there was a knife wielding mass stabber.
Yes.
And the mayor came out this morning and said, well, we have to limit guns or not guns, but limit knives, who can actually carry knives. It's ridiculous. Mass shooters also in the United States, we average less than 300 mass shooting killings.
Right.
So less than 300 people a year die. But like we said, in 2017, we had 47,000 die from gunshots, but only about 280 or so were actually in mass shootings. So we're going to change the whole gun laws for less than 1/5 of 1% of all gun deaths in this country. It's really ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, again, another political thing they do in regard to that, the gun laws is go after the NRA. And I talk about this all the time. It's going now 5 decades I've been involved in law enforcement. I can't think, and I worked on homicides, and the guys before me, we can't think of one person that we arrested that was, especially a high, say a homicide, that was a member of the NRA. So, and none of these shooters, like we mentioned, California, where I think in the last couple of years, if you put California, Baltimore, and a couple of other states, there's over 3,000 young, and I'm going to say young black youths are being shot with firearms. And you don't have to agree with me with this, but I don't know why. My question: how come Black Lives Matter doesn't matter? In geographical different areas. So
well, it doesn't fit their political bent, so they're not going that way. The one word that we use to manipulate people are words that end in ist, whether you're racist, sexist, whatever. You can't prove you're not something. So it's kind of like, hey, let's throw this out there, and you'll be you'll lose because the emotional energy will shift against you when I call you this label, instead of people actually looking at what they're talking about and not paying attention to deaths that they actually could intervene with,
Right.
and start working with families and people to stop those deaths.
Right. Why is that? That seems to be the norm now, that we sort of believe these things. A group of people can believe, oh, I'll use Donald Trump as an example. He's a racist. And so many people they run with it without, you just mentioned, without doing any research. They just,
Well,
and these are not stupid people. They're not ignorant people, but yet they run with it, Dr. Huber.
Well, if they said, "Oh, well, wait a minute, the economy's horrible because Trump is in office," well, the economy's great, so
Yes.
they don't go that way. So they go after, again, something that nobody can prove a negative. So you can't say you can say I'm not a racist, but you can't prove it. So we turn around and look at, Trump has 13 or 14 NAACP awards. He's been awarded honors by Al Sharpton, by Jesse Jackson, by multiple civil liberties leaders in our country for the things he's done for inner city youth and minorities. He has gone on and on and on like that. And now that he is in office and he's not following the Democratic line, or for that matter, the Republican line. I mean, he has it difficult in both houses because he's not really a Republican. He's not really a Democrat. He's doing things that he thinks is best for this country, and nobody can get in his back pocket and manipulate him. So he scares everybody, and except for the middle class Americans who seem to love the fact that he's actually improving our country and getting our economy back on track, getting people hired. The unemployment is so low now. It's ridiculous. I mean, something like 400% more African Americans are employed today than they were just, 5 years ago. And it's really helping this country out. And in fact, I saw today on one of the major networks talking about how we have to have a recession in order for President Trump to not get reelected. So we need to start doing things to hurt our country. I'm like, that's ridiculous. He's actually out there improving this country, and a lot of people just don't like it because he's not one of their leaders, and their political leaders are saying he's racist. They're believing it because they don't like him. He scares them. They hate him. He somehow he stole the race away from Hillary Clinton, but now we've had the Mueller report and there's no collusion. In fact, the report itself suggests that there may be collusion from the Hillary campus that trying to overturn Trump. But no, they don't want to hear that. Let's just forget it all now and let's focus on these mass shootings and take away more civil rights that way.
Right. Yeah, that's a good analogy. How can you mentioned they, we know who they is because you mentioned people that we're talking about. They loved him prior to him announcing.
Absolutely.
They loved him. Now which I can't understand, the hatred is, if he was, say, assassinated, they would love it. I wouldn't, I disliked Obama big time. I wouldn't want to see the poor guy, assassinated.
Absolutely. And people are calling him out and saying they need to go attack him and harm him.
I know that.
Go after his son. I mean, I could, if you give me 5 minutes, I could pull the quotes up and who said them. But whether it's a comedian holding his head up in effigy saying we need to, do something to this man, it's very disturbing, whether they're comedians or political leaders. Either way, we shouldn't be doing that to any person in office. I can't remember another time when that was actually done.
Right. Well, you mentioned effigy. What could be worse than the so-called? I don't even want to give her credit for.
Exactly. I didn't mention her name on purpose.
Because I know. Well, I'm glad the viewers know who I'm talking about. With the president's head cut off and bleeding. I mean, and that's, again, you wouldn't want to see that, the old cliche, with your worst enemy. So, and yet they have no problem. I'd like to kill him. I'll punch him. I'll shoot him.
Right.
I really, but what I don't understand is that none of these people, if you said something like that years ago, the Secret Service will be knocking on your door. If you said anything that would indicate a threat, to especially the President of the United States of America. It's not happening now. I really don't understand, like, some of these congresswomen, the things they're saying. To me, I think they should be arrested for conspiring to incite riots.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just like yelling fire in a movie theater,
Yeah.
it's instigating. And, we already know that there's been 12 or 13 attempts on the president's life where there's the
Yes.
2 or 3 people who've jumped over the fence and charged the house and were taken down by Secret Service, or things that weren't as obvious to that. And the media doesn't cover it at all, except for the ones who jump onto the ground and cross the fence, because everybody sees it. Everything else they keep quiet about. And it's disturbing, and it's being instigated, I believe, by our so-called left leaders and left entertainers and comedians, and it's very disturbing.
It is disturbing. So, but talking about analyzing and what you do, and as a professor. So, why is this happening? How would somebody who we assume is a peace-loving actor, actress, person, politician, indicate all this hatred? Which they never.
Well, we have social media now, and if we think about how people act when they get into groups, you think of groupthink. How they all start becoming each other's cheerleader, and then the only way to achieve some kind of hierarchy in that is to be the most extreme in that group. So now we get on social media, and we talked just before we went on the air about Facebook and all that kind of stuff. And you basically weed out people who don't think like you, and you don't have to unfriend them. You can actually block their posts or have them, not a priority, so all the other posts come up. But what happens is then you look down and you have 200 or 1,000 friends, and everything you say is exactly what you believe. So when you're crossing the street down there in Times Square and you look around, there's 300 people crossing the street with you. You believe every one of those 300 people think exactly like you do. And all of a sudden now it's okay to say those things because they all think that way. And reality is not everybody thinks that way, not even within your own group. And it's very disturbing. But how do you achieve a hierarchy? How do you achieve some sort of authority in that group? Is to be the most extreme. And so they take the playing field and just move it up and up and up. And I think they're losing contact with real life. And we talk about reality testing and how important that is. Well, I think we need to take breaks away from social media to be able to see what is really going on in the world. And I've had conversations with other hosts and other shows, and oftentimes they get wrapped up in the people who support them as well, and they don't see both sides of the picture. And the interesting thing is getting out on the street, talking to students, talking to patients, talking to employees in different companies and different industries. It's really interesting to see how that plays out. And what I'm finding out, and actually what some of the polls I've seen in the last 2 weeks, is actually Trump's becoming more popular.
Yeah.
And it's a scary thing for people who have that groupthink, because now their world is not based on reality as far as they can see. And so they are grasping at anything, and they go to even more extremes that way. And it's really a sad situation.
Well, you mentioned a group of people walking across the street in Times Square. Well, that's the old, you're following like sheep.
Yes.
Right. So, but why is that? And why is I talk about, which is mind-boggling, and I'm sure you spoke about it many times. You probably even do that, as a professor. How was Adolf Hitler able to get millions of people to follow him? That is, to me, is the most unbelievable thing, I think, in history. And yet we see that at a smaller level, I would say. So,
well, if we go back and look, the Nazi Party was only about 10% of that country's population. So they controlled 90%, and they used force. And one of the things they did is they took away weapons. They took away guns from the civilians, in particular from the Jewish population. They weren't allowed to have weapons. So now they couldn't defend themselves. And the Jewish population were, doctors and lawyers and business owners, and were doing really well while everybody else was struggling. So they targeted that group and said, look, they're destroying our economy. They're keeping the money for themselves just because. And it made people get upset.
Yeah.
They didn't have sources to go find out. Not everybody knew people with the Jewish background, and it was real easy for them to inundate you with media, and they got control. Simple.
It's just amazing that one person was able to. But I think he was looking for something to make him get where he wanted to be and where he finally got, and he found
Absolutely.
that the Jewish people, whatever, it could have been something else, right? But
Absolutely, it could have been anything else.
Could have been anything else, but he found that somehow more easier for him. But how does someone like him, who his background, if you want to talk about education and being, well, he was able to do that, crazy like a fox, I guess, and he probably, well, you would know, would you say he was insane?
Well, insanity means not knowing the difference between right and wrong.
Right.
And, I believe what he knew, what he was doing was not good, especially for the Jewish population, but it put him in power.
Yeah.
And it gave him absolute power. And anywhere in his country, people feared him because if I stand up to him, now look what he did to those people, he could do it to me. And the Gypsies were a group of people that were also tortured and punished, just like along with the Jewish population by the German country. And, it's interesting because they were a Nationalist Socialist Party, the National Socialist Party of Germany. And I love it when they go here in the U.S. and they start comparing Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler, when the reality of it is he's just the opposite. He wants to give the power back to the everyday people and not the ruling class. And it's very interesting how then they want to turn around and say, okay, let's take away all the guns from them. Yet they're giving all the guns into the government, who's controlled by this man who they say is a Nazi. It doesn't make sense.
I just spoke to my old friend Rudy Giuliani the other day. He appointed me as the head of the New York City Sheriff's Department. So once in a while, if I'm fortunate, I'm able to get 30 seconds from him. But the question was, I said, what you just said, they accused Donald Trump of being a Nazi, but the Antifa reminds me of the Gestapo to a degree. How they, and I says, Rudy, why aren't these people arrested under the RICO law? They're an organized group to commit crimes. They're together. And he said, Lou, I've been talking about that for 6 months, or 5 months or whatever, 7 months, and we're looking into that. But I didn't want to go into why you have to look into it, because the law, and he was, we all know his background as a tough U.S. Attorney General.
Absolutely.
I would think the local police department arrest them, which they should in the street. It has to start at that level. And then maybe the feds jump in, and which they do if you're a mafioso type guy, and then bang you under the RICO law, make it federal.
Well, the problem is their defense is you're a racist.
Yes.
And now they have riots popping up. And our previous administration actually encouraged violence in the streets. And we know that that is a potential. We've seen it just recently. In the last 10 years, we've seen violence in the streets. It's a pretty scary thing.
Speaking of scary things, why is it these young people, they don't realize that they have a gun, they're teenagers, and they take a life, and it doesn't register? In other words, I don't think they realize that death is final. Am I close to something? I don't understand why they don't. They can't see the difference between life and death, or it doesn't hit them.
Well, a couple things. It used to be when gangs would have gang violence, they were out there with fists and knives and crowbars, and they were having to kill people with their own hands. And now they've been able to remove themselves by throwing a projectile out of a gun and hitting somebody that way and killing them. So they're not able to actually sit and watch, and they don't have to sit there and watch that death. So they can remove themselves. The other side to that is, so many of our kids today are so wrapped up in these online communities,
Right.
that they've lost that contact. And if you think about it, America was built by people who were out hunting and fishing, and they would bring their food home, and they saw firsthand death and how it brought life when you utilized it, whether it was a deer or a fish,
Right.
and you cook it up. And today in America, we know that for every 100 hunters out there, we're only teaching 60 kids to hunt or fish. And we're losing that ground because so many people are stuck in inner cities, and it's difficult to get out of the country. And it's also very expensive to get, for example, a deer lease, and to get out where you can actually safely hunt animals.
Right.
And it's something we need for conservation.
Yes.
If you've ever gone hiking and come across a starving herd of deer or mountain goats, mountain sheep, that type of stuff, it's you understand why we need to do that, because we got rid of the pumas, we got rid of the mountain lions, we got rid of the predators that normally thin the herds, and we're not teaching our kids about that. And I always hear all the time about conservation, nature conservation.
Right.
We can't throw away, don't use straws because the animals will choke on them, and but they're not getting the whole picture, and they're only getting what people want you to see in the media. And I think, going back to that whole parenting thing, absentee parents, parents, you got to get involved. You got to get back out there, start working with your kids, get them off their computers, get them off their phones, get them outside, take them on hikes, take them on walks. You don't have to take them fishing and hunting all the time, but it definitely is something that is simple enough to do. There's people out there in our communities who are willing to do that with our kids. We just have to, get a hold of them. It takes a little bit of effort. And those kids will start to realize, they go in and shoot a deer and it's on their dinner plate the next night. They understand it ain't coming back. It's not like the video game when they get shot and they rematerialize 30 seconds later.
Right. You think a lot of people utilize that as an excuse? Well, the kids are watching video games. Do you think there's a connection with that? I mean, I have yes, no. It depends. I think it depends on the youngster that's doing it.
It depends on the youngster, and what we do know is it doesn't necessarily incite violence. It doesn't do that, but it definitely, we see kids who play violent video games. We know that a lot of times when they're startled or scared, their first attack or first response is a defensive pose, or maybe even an attacking posture, because they're so trained. Now, it doesn't mean everyone ends up fighting in that situation, but they're so trained by playing, Call of Duty and all these other, and I just picked that out of the hat. I don't have any data to say that that's any worse than anything else, but and they don't see that their first posturing is that of a threat to the opposing people who may have just accidentally bumped into you, and now all of a sudden, you're posturing, they see you posturing, they posture back, and then our limited social interactions. I mean, we have some amazing things happen. Teenage pregnancies down, teenage sexually transmitted infections are down, but it's because they're on their computer. They're not actually talking to each other. They're talking to computer voices and computer faces.
I'm thinking backwards. I think it's the 50-year anniversary of Woodstock, and the new millenniums. They just wanted to celebrate it, but then they realized, wow, we actually have to go there.
Absolutely.
And that's why it probably won't happen. Because when I saw that, you mean we have to travel to celebrate? No, you could do it at home on your. I don't know, on you could Skype it maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
Or you can just live stream it. I don't know. So, but that's the difference. And so it's good in one sense, and then it pretty much hurts us. And what would be? I'm not going to ask you what would be the answer, but what would be the best thing? Again, it's up to the parents, I have to say.
It's up to the parents, but I would encourage your kids to do anything that takes both hands. Encourage them to play baseball, basketball, football. Get them outside. Get them on a bicycle. And in fact, my kids have to earn time on the computer.
Great.
And my son's a second-degree black belt because he does martial arts, and he gets time off to play video games and stuff that way. I mean, we go to work for $1. Why can't we do the same thing with kids? It's not bribery. If it is, then people who go to work for a buck are being bribed, right?
Well,
No, it's called they're being productive. And that's
yeah,
all we need to do is teach our
well,
kids to be
it's
productive,
amazing.
use both their hands, and
Uh,
it makes it difficult for them to pick up that camera and take that picture.
in my time, it was called not bribery, it was called an allowance. You know, so but you know, I did.
Hey, I let my kids live here for free. That's good enough allowance, right?
Well, absolutely. No, well, listen, but 35, you got to get them out of the basement.
Not well, they're 17 and 14
Okay.
right now. So yeah,
Yes.
definitely.
Well, that's the generation today. Seems like,
It is.
and I actually see that in the family, not my immediate family,
Well,
but I
and
see
we
it in the
see that
family.
across the board. The
Yeah.
millennials have the highest rate of suicide attempts of any previous
Wow.
generation, 1 in 5. That's 20% are attempting suicide.
Didn't
And
know
it
that.
has to do with the fact they have no coping skills because
Mm,
they haven't been allowed to fail. The parents have stepped in and intervened, and they have no coping skills. And they get out on their own, and they're lost, and they're scared, and they think, if this is it, I might as well end it now. And I think that has something to do with all the shootings we've been having as well,
ah.
too.
I mean, I didn't know that. The
Yeah.
highest rate of suicides under the new millennium, this generation,
The
yeah,
millennials, yes,
the
sir.
millenniums, yes.
20% are attempting suicide.
Holy cow! It's just it's amazing. So how can well, you're in a different area, but wouldn't you think our educators should realize that and try to maybe I see you smiling already. I know. I had a question you. You think our educators would play a role in that if they're aware of it? You know,
Well, I think they're slowly coming around to it, but unfortunately, educators are the ones who are talking about not letting our kids have stress, not teaching them to cope. I mean, I had teachers get mad at me when I let my kid fail a class in third grade because he wouldn't do the work. Okay, don't do the work. Let's
right.
see what happens. And I didn't get mad at the teacher. And I didn't really get mad at my son. I said, look at what you chose. Now let's figure out a way out of here. Here's what I recommend you do. And, now he's doing great. He's got all these acceptance letters to college and everything else, but I let him struggle. I let him fail.
Oh,
And parents need to do that when they're young, and they could be here to help them and use it as a teaching moment instead of waiting
yeah.
until they're 18, 19, 20 years old and the police are coming knocking on their door
Huh.
because there ain't much mom and dad can do at that point.
Well, your kids are fortunate to have you as a dad. So
Well, I'm biased. I think you're right. But
you have to be. My guess is Professor Dr. John Yuba, and he's a clinical forensic psychologist. You mentioned red flag early on when we started talking. Now they want to implement a red flag law, and they think it's going to maybe prevent some of these mass shootings. What's your thoughts on that, Dr. Yuba?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I'm very concerned about messing with our civil liberties and messing with our God-given rights.
Yeah.
And I think if there's no process for due process, they should not be allowed. I know as a mental health professional, I've worked in several states, and all the states I've worked in had processes for when we have somebody who's mentally ill,
Right.
who is a threat to self or others, and we're able to go before a judge. They're able to get an attorney, defend themselves, and then a decision is made as to what we need to do as far as maybe committing them to a state facility, forcing them to take medications, forcing them to see a therapist, whatever.
Yeah.
And it varies, but we have to have that due process. Because if I turn around and I'm in charge of red flag and I get mad at Lou, he
Yes.
scares me. Let's go take his guns away.
Right.
That's not a way to do things. And in fact, I've talked about mental health warrants where police can be police, judges can be judges, and when it gets to a certain point, the judges can then go and ask someone like myself, a forensically trained psychologist or psychiatrist, and have them do a risk assessment, give that information back to the judge, and let the judge make an informed decision as to whether we need to move forward with some sort of commitment, or again, giving the parents a time limit. You have guns in the house, you have a minor. Now you have
Yes.
24 hours to get a gun safe, or we're going to come and hold your guns until you get one.
It's interesting. You brought up a good point. There are 35,000, I'll use this as an example, 35,000 New York City police officers. That's a large one.
Wow.
But it's always been like that. And they had the least shootings at home, the least of any group. And these are
Yeah.
armed, because I was one of them, and raising kids in the house. And wondered if the neighbors would say, "Aren't you afraid the kids, your husband has a gun?" Does he bring his gun home? And why does he carry a gun? Because I'd say, somehow they know off duty, but they would ask that question. But the point I'm bringing out is if you have trained people, I'm jumping a little bit,
You're right.
we have trained people. I think, what are your thoughts on this? Some people argue with me, and I shouldn't say some, a lot. I think, how do I say this? But I'm going to say we need more guns out there.
Well, and that's actually,
And
if
that-
we look at the few states that actually have no fettering, with the Constitution. Others they
Right.
don't get in the way of the Constitution.
Correct.
And there are no restrictions to gun ownership in them. Those are the states that have the fewest amount of mass shootings. In
Yeah.
fact, some of them have never had a mass shooting.
Yeah.
And crime is opportunistic. If you create a soft target and somebody wants to do carnage, that's where they're going to go. They're not going to go to the police department and start shooting there because they're not going to have a major impact. And in fact, this weekend we were at a gathering, and somebody had heard some of my interviews. I did several of them last week.
Wow.
And started saying how he didn't think we needed guns at all. Period. And my first question to him was, when was the last time you shot a rifle or a pistol?
Right.
And he says, I've never even picked one up. And I go, you have no place to do that. And so what I'll do is you come out with me, and I'll teach you how to shoot, and then we can talk about it afterwards. And he absolutely refused.
Yeah. You mentioned soft target. What are the gun-free zones? That's a soft target.
Extremely soft target,
yeah.
yes, sir.
So that's why I say we need more guns. In regard to El Paso and Walmart, these malls do have security guards. They've always had security guards.
Yes.
But because of insurance reasons or liability, which we know, they don't want them armed. But we're in a different world now. What is it going to cost them now? What's the liability going to be now? From
Exactly.
That,
Well, we need to actually look at the data, and I
Yeah.
think that's what people are afraid to look at. The data suggests that what you're saying is correct. And if we look at El Paso, the minute somebody armed showed up, the guy put his guns down and he put his hands up
Exactly.
and said, "Hey." And and now they're in a place where if they shoot him, it's police brutality, and they're at fault. So they arrested him. And, and instead he got away with taking out 22 people. And, he's hopefully going to get prosecuted to the fullest extent. But whatever happens, I hope that the judges go in there and say, okay, now over the next X number of years, you're open for investigation by therapists, by psychologists, by psychiatrists, and researchers, because we need to find out as much about these people as we can in order to circumvent this and stop that person from getting to the point where they felt like shooting somebody is the answer.
Well, that's why I'm glad they didn't kill him, because we need that
Absolutely.
info. We need that desperately. So. In regard to armed security guards in Walmart, because people are asking, well, how would they do that? I said, well, you have a double door, and you have an armed security behind the second door, which would probably be in the mall area or out of the lobby, I guess, so to speak. He will see somebody coming in with a long gun,
Absolutely.
And he could be challenged right there and then. The worst thing, and I say double door because he could be a target himself, the security guard.
Yes, sir.
With the armed
And
person.
in fact, if I was going to do that, that's what you would do.
That's right.
I mean, I thank goodness that I'm of right mind, and I think that killing is wrong, and that alone is enough reason for me not to go after people. But it is a scary thought that individuals, who then try to defend themselves become an excuse for the violence.
Yeah. Absolutely. Do you feel that the some of these shooters, like the one that we're talking about, El Paso, that gave himself up? I think because before I walked the beat on the street, I walked the beat in the jails in the city of New York,
Yes.
and I saw a lot of them like this John Dillinger, Al Capone, aura, and they were enjoying it. Do you think that? One of the things I think about is what they say. Well, how come when the cops came? Because they would assume suicide by police or death by police, as they say. I think he wants to be known. I think one of the things that forever now in his mind, he'll be a hero, I think, to a degree.
Absolutely. I think that has to do with his mental state. I don't know if it's necessarily mental illness. However, I believe that when somebody thinks it's okay to kill people, that that there is probably some of that behind them, as opposed to defending a country where those people don't necessarily want to kill. But when people are trying to kill your family, what do? You use lethal force, and they escalate it. You be able to defend yourself and escalate it just right along with them. That's the only way to answer violence.
Wow.
And it's scary.
It is. So, one of the thoughts I was having is that, again, from experience, is that they're losers, these shooters, and now they're famous. Is that part of this too?
What I'm
Dr.
finding
Huber?
is individuals like yourself and myself. When I do these interviews, I think I did almost 30 interviews last week, and I think only one person that I was doing a national interview with, only one person actually mentioned the name, and it was right at the beginning, and then they stopped. That was it. They didn't mention it again.
Good.
And I think that's what we've got to do.
Yeah.
It's a really sad thing when we read these kids' manifestos, and I mean, I'm calling them kids, even if they're in their mid-20s or early 30s, because their development has stopped somewhere, that moral development, and they have said things like, okay, I'm going to go out and be the biggest mass killer, or I'm going to go out and do this on record. And I think we need to shut that down, and I think the media needs to be a lot more responsible and refuse to go after names, refuse to tell the name.
That's right.
We can just say, hey, it was a shooter from this area, and he was 20 years old, or whatever the situation is. They don't have to say his exact name and where he lived, because there are other people that become victims besides the actual victims, and that's the family members. And believe it or not, they may not actually realize what's going on. I mean, it's easy enough for people to do things, and especially if they're absentee or if they're just clueless. They may not have any idea that their child or that their brother or cousin was able to do anything like this, but then their life is ultimately altered the rest of their life, period, because of it.
Right. Do you, it's, I guess it's possible a lot of times family member, I would think, they may see something but don't want to believe it in their mind. In other words, there may be some indication that my son or my nephew or has a mental issue and he could be dangerous, but they don't want to believe it until when it happens. And they say, well, I knew he was going to do this. He was capable of doing this. He said he was going to do this. And yet we talked about the red flag. There was no red flag from them.
Well, and again, I think if we had something like a mental health warrant that we could have due process ensured and we can follow through with that. And believe it or not, I've actually been contacted this past week by several senators from across the country. We'll just see if they continue to follow up with or not. But that's what needs to happen. These people need to know that it's not necessarily going to be criminal type. We're gonna lock this person down, but we're actually going to go through and try and find a solution before it gets to that point. And that's the whole idea behind those mental health warrants.
It's amazing. When I was running the sheriff's department, we issued those mental health warrants, so I'm a little familiar with that because it's pretty much sort of civil to a degree.
It should be a civil situation, and it should be very similar to those civil commitments that we talked about when somebody is an immediate threat to themselves or others. But this has to do with people threatening. In fact, 56% of our mass shooters tell people exactly what they're going to do before they do it. 77% of them spend weeks preparing. So if a police officer could actually go in and check to see if they had not just the thought to do it, but the wherewithal to do it, we could have intervened with a lot of these shooters.
Wow, amazing. This is Lou Telano, and my guest is Professor John Huber. He's a clinical forensic psychologist. Now, I found from experience people like Charles Manson, I use that as an example. He was very popular in jail, and how can I say it? He loved it. He enjoyed it. And I couldn't understand. I had an opportunity to interview Son of Sam.
Okay.
Yeah, but I wouldn't do it for what you said a moment ago. I didn't want to give this guy any type of exposure, especially personally. I don't, I didn't want to do that because we talked about you and I. We did a little interview with regard to
Right.
Sam David Berkowitz. By the way, how did that go off the ground? You and I.
Well,
So,
we're still working on that,
yeah,
and that's a work in progress. We've got a
work in
lot of
progress.
other things going on, but hopefully I'll be back up in New York in a few weeks and wrap that up,
Oh, great.
and I'll definitely let you know what we're doing at that point. So.
Okay. And we're talking about. I played a small role in David Berkowitz, Son of Sam. There was a witness to a degree, and I had to hide her, to potential
Exactly.
witness to that. And in fact, there was a close friend of mine who made the arrest. I always give him, even though he passed away. Eddie Zigo was the detective that made the arrest.
Right.
And
And that's an interesting thing you bring that up because the ego, that narcissism
yes,
of people like Charles Manson
mm,
are, are that's part and parcel to this psychopathy or sociopath that we're talking about here.
right.
And what made Charles Manson was his narcissism plus his charisma. He was able
Wow.
to draw people in. He was a cult leader and he was able to get them to do anything. In fact, that's why he wasn't actually involved directly hands
No.
on with the killings, but he encouraged and got them to do it, people to do them for him. And that's why he got convicted and was in prison for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And it's that charisma. And what we see with a lot of psychopaths and sociopaths is that they are very narcissistic. For example, they believe that the police are not nearly as smart as they are, and that's why they can get away with this stuff. And they taunt and tease because they have that belief set that there's no way they're gonna catch me. Then when they get caught, they're not upset because they did the crimes. They get upset because those police are so dumb and yet they caught me. I must have messed up. I give it away to them, and so, as
Right.
opposed to saying, "Hey, the truth is there are very smart police officers, and a lot of them
Yeah.
have a lot of that same narcissistic personality in there because they believe they can go after and catch those people, and we need them. That's what we need in
Yes.
those people to go
Yeah.
after those characters who are not healthy and doing bad things in our society."
Wow, that's a good. My partner and I are both very conceited, so that helped us. So that helped us catch up to a lot of these bad guys. So,
Absolutely, believe it or not.
yes, we were like giving ourselves medals before, after we was successful in catching them, So
Yes.
it works works both ways. But David Berkowitz, someone was said, "Hey Lou, I can get you up there and talk to him." He said, "No, I don't want to do that." He said, "Well, he's different now. Now he's a born again Christian." I said, "Come on, come on. When people go to jail, they become born again Christians. They become Muslims. They all of a sudden they
It's
find
for the parole
God.
board.
They find God. Yes.
Exactly.
So
And that's an interesting thing because, having worked with several jurisdictions and done risk assessment, it's funny how many of these people come up and we go into jails and we do
wow.
testing and our clinical interviews and stuff like that. And every one of them has such a strong narcissistic tendency that they think that they're fooling us. And
Yeah.
I let them believe that. I mean, I'm not going to argue with them while I'm
Yeah.
in jail with them. I mean, but the fact is they tend to be more cooperative if I just let them think that, yeah, I'm stupid.
Right.
I don't know what
Right.
you're doing. And that gives me everything I need to be able to move forward. And they tell me things that they wouldn't otherwise tell me because they think I'm not smart enough to catch it.
Right.
And we put it in our report and we do the statistical,
Aha.
actuarially based analysis of risk, and we give that
Yeah.
information to the judge. The judge then makes the ultimate decision. I just give him an
Sure.
educated set of information so that the judge can make a better choice.
So you put in that they're very narcissistic. They're very into themselves, and they
Well,
actually
absolutely.
enjoy the exposure or whatever. Right? Yeah.
That's right.
I just before I left for the police department, I can just thinking of just one of the people that we had in jail, and that was a fellow they called Murph the Surf. with the, if you remember the famous diamond that was stolen from the Museum, I think, of Natural History in New York. I can't think. It was a famous diamond. I forget what country it came
Right.
from. And he was a movie star in jail because he got all this exposure, front page. They were able to get this great. But meanwhile, I once said to him, I don't understand. You're going to do at least 20 years. What are you enjoying? And I believe it or not, Dr. John Huber, he said, officer, I wasn't really thinking of that. And I don't know if I'm thinking about it now. He was just thinking for right now,
For the moment.
for the moment. Yes. Yes. Do you find that with them?
Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
part of it. They want to
Yeah, it
live
is.
for the moment. And they talk
Wow.
about you only live once. It's the new thing of the millennials, YOLO. You only live once.
Wow.
So they're living in the moment. And I see value in living in the moment. Don't sweat over spilt milk. But at the
Yeah.
same time, you've got to prepare for tomorrow.
Yeah.
And, be ready to live tomorrow, but set yourself up so tomorrow is maybe a
Wow.
little better than today. And they've lost that second step where you work on making tomorrow a little bit better than today, and they think about what am I getting right this moment.
Wow.
And if I can get something bigger or better out of it this moment, that's all I want.
Right. That's exactly right. That's what I saw. Enjoy today, but enjoy tomorrow more. Very good.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting. So, is this new now? I know you have your own podcast, and
Yes.
so how can the audience find you on this new live stream show? Correct? Is it live stream? Or is it?
We right now we're not doing live stream.
Oh.
We've talked about it. We've actually
So-
talked with some networks and stuff about doing that. Right now, I'm on the Mental Health News Radio
Mental health,
Network,
yes,
and
yes.
actually the World Health Organization is kind of perched along there with us, and that started earlier this past year. And that's kind of nice to have them along for the ride.
Wow.
But if you want to find out about all my social media
Yeah.
and all of what we're doing,
Right.
go to drpsycho.org. That's drpsycho.org. Dr. Psycho is one word. And that takes you to our website, Mainstream Mental Health, where you can follow our media page. And like the links we're going to put up for this podcast
Right.
and all the other shows
Oh,
I've
great.
done, including some of the live TV we have digital copies of on our YouTube channel. And you can watch and listen to all of that.
Wow. In 3 minutes, right? Any suggestions? Any suggestions for this country? What's going on now? On things that we talked about. How do we sort of? It's a tough question. How can we prevent? These future mass. What can people do? What can we do? I should say to try to
Well,
prevent these mass shooters, Dr. Huber.
I think, first of all, we really need to educate ourselves. If you've never shot a gun, go to your local gun range. They have opportunities where they want to teach you and teach you safely about guns. You should respect guns. Don't fear them. Respect them. And teach kids around you to respect authority, but question authority. I don't want you to just run around and do whatever they say,
Yeah.
as well as teach your kids to be respectful and let them fail, let them bounce off the ground, pick them
Right.
up, put Band-Aids on their knees, and talk to them about ways they could have done things differently. Help them learn coping strategies so that they're not feeling isolated and locked down with only one way to go. And part of the problem is you see all these shooters are very young.
Yes.
Our brains don't start acting like adult brains until we're in our mid-20s to late 20s in some cases. So they haven't matured enough. They may be pseudo-adults. They may be making decisions about their rent and work and what they eat every day, what kind of car they drive and gas in their car, all of that kind of stuff. But their brains still haven't fully matured. And when they get emotionally upset like this, believe it or not, a fight or flight mechanism kicks in and blood goes from their executive centers in your brain where you think rationally to
Right.
their limbic system, which is where all their emotions are, and they
Right.
just start responding emotionally. And that's a dangerous thing.
Oh, a dangerous thing. Thank you, Dr. John Huber. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Lou.
Oh, listen, stop by when you hit New York.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. That was Professor John Huber, clinical forensic psychologist. Hope to see you soon. See you soon. This is all right. Thank you. We could we'll say so long to Dr. John Huber, guys. Okay, we're out of it. Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you.